She didn't fight back. That's what everyone remembered afterward. Through all of it, the sneering and the shoving and the laughter that bounced off the diner's tiled walls like something dirty, the small woman with the scarred hands and the dish soap smell never raised her fists, never raised her voice. She couldn't raise her voice. She hadn't spoken in 11 months. What she did instead was stand very still and watch the man threatening her with the particular quality of attention that most people never learn, some people are born with, and a very few develop over years of lying motionless on a hillside, looking through a scope at something 500 meters away that would kill everyone she loved if she blinked. She watched him the way a mountain watches weather. She was still watching when 5 United States Marines set down their beers, pushed back their chairs, and snapped to full attention so sharply the silverware rattled on every table in the room. Nobody in Frank's Corner Diner understood what they were seeing. By midnight, 40 million people would. The morning shift at Frank's Corner Diner began at 5:45, which meant Maya Chen arrived at 5:30. She came on foot, down the cracked sidewalk of Route 9, where it bent through the middle of Millhaven, Montana, with the mountains still purple and the air carrying the particular cold that late September saves for the hours before dawn. She wore the same thing she always wore. Cargo pants faded to the color of old grass, a thermal undershirt beneath a gray hooded sweatshirt, and work boots that were slightly too large because she'd bought them from the men's rack. Her black hair was pulled back with a rubber band she'd taken from the day's newspaper. No jewelry, no makeup, no earbuds, ever. She moved quietly. Not the way people who are trying to be quiet move, with that exaggerated softness that announces itself, but with the complete, unconscious silence of someone who had learned, at some point, that sound was information and information belonged to you and not to anyone else. People who noticed her on the street thought she was just a shy girl. The people who paid more careful attention, there weren't many of them in Millhaven, might have noticed that she walked with her back never turned to an open space, that she positioned herself naturally near walls, that her eyes moved through a room in the same systematic grid pattern, left to right, high to low, before she allowed herself to relax a fraction. She never fully relaxed. Frank Kowalski had given her the job 14 months ago without asking many questions, which was why she'd taken it. She'd come in on a Tuesday, written looking for work, any kind on her notepad, and slid it across the counter to him. He'd looked at the notepad, looked at her hands, the scars across her right knuckles, the calluses in configurations he couldn't name, looked at her face, where two things lived simultaneously, an exhaustion old enough to have grown roots, and something behind the eyes that was not frightened of him, not frightened of anything, and was waiting politely for his answer. "You wash dishes?" he'd asked. She'd nodded. 5 days a week, cash, 6 to 2. You start tomorrow. That was all. He had not asked why she didn't speak. He had not asked about the scars. He was 56 years old and had grown up in a family where his father came back from Vietnam and sat in the same chair for 3 years without really being in it. And he knew better than most that some people were carrying things that didn't have words yet, and the decent thing to do was give them somewhere to put their hands while they figured out how to bear the weight. His wife Sandra was the same way. She'd started leaving Maya's lunch on the prep counter, a bowl of soup or half a sandwich, without ceremony, without comment, the way you'd leave water for a stray cat you weren't sure would stay. Over the months the cat had stayed, and Sandra had started touching Maya's shoulder briefly when she passed, and Maya had started allowing it, which Sandra understood was a form of trust she didn't take lightly. The diner itself was nothing remarkable. 14 stools at a counter worn smooth by elbows. 8 booths along the window wall. A specials board written in Sandra's looping cursive. Photographs from local hunting seasons going back 4 decades. A mounted trout above the register that Frank's father had caught in 1971. The place smelled of bacon grease and coffee and the warmth of a building that had been heated and lived in and cared for a very long time. Maya liked it. The simplicity of it. The way her job was exactly what it appeared to be. You took dirty dishes and you made them clean. There was a correctness to that she found almost restful. She worked with precise economy. Nothing wasted. She had the dish station organized in a configuration that Frank had once tried to replicate when she was off sick and had failed entirely, though he hadn't mentioned that to her. She moved through the kitchen like someone accustomed to working in environments where excess motion was a liability, which was, in fact, exactly what she was accustomed to. 11 months ago, she had been lying in a hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, in a room with a window overlooking a concrete parking structure, unable to speak and unable to fully explain why. While a doctor kept using the phrase psychosomatic mutism, and a four-star general stopped by once to tell her she'd done her country proud, and then never came back. Now she was here, hands in soapy water, mountains outside, Sandra's coffee on the edge of the station where she always put it, because she'd learned Maya didn't ask, but always accepted. It was better. Not fixed, not healed, but better. She had been at the sink for 90 minutes when Frank came back to tell her a group of Harley riders had pulled into the lot. Might get busy, he said. She nodded without looking up. He watched her for a moment. You okay? He asked this the way he always asked it, as close as he ever came to asking the things he didn't ask about. She gave him a thumbs up without stopping work. He went back out front. Maya kept washing, kept her eyes on the dishes, and did not mention the thing she'd noted through the small window above the sink, that she had already counted 17 motorcycles, 3 of which bore the Devil's Throttle Club patch on their saddlebags, a club whose Billings chapter had 3 outstanding federal warrants among its leadership, which she knew for reasons that had nothing to do with her time in Millhaven, and that the man swinging his leg off the largest bike was built the way some men are built when they have never, in their adult life, had to worry about consequences. She filed this away the way she filed everything, and kept washing. The 5 Marines had arrived an hour earlier, which turned out to be good fortune for a number of people. They were on leave, a road trip working its way from Portland toward Chicago with no particular urgency, and a shared commitment to taking the interesting roads. They had the particular ease of people who are deeply comfortable with each other, who have been in serious danger together and come out the other side, and now find that most ordinary civilian stressors don't register as stressful. Captain James Torres was the senior officer, 30 years old, with a lean face and the quiet authority of someone who had no need to demonstrate authority. He sat at the head of his booth with his back to the wall, which was habit rather than choice. Across from him was Staff Sergeant Ava Mitchell, 28, the only woman in the group, who was systematically working through a stack of pancakes with the focused efficiency of someone trained to eat whatever was available as quickly as possible. Next to Torres sat Lance Corporal Rick Santos, 26, whose energy expressed itself as low-level constant motion, tapping fingers, bouncing knee, eyes moving around the room. Sergeant Marcus Webb and Corporal Danny Park occupied the adjacent booth, pulled into conversation range. Marcus was 32, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair going slightly gray at his temples. He was the oldest of the group and the quietest, and he had the specific stillness of a man who had spent a significant portion of his professional life lying completely motionless in various uncomfortable locations waiting for precisely the right moment. Danny was 24 and had the wide eyes of someone still mildly astonished to be doing the job he was doing, which Marcus had privately identified as an excellent quality to preserve. They were on their 3rd cups of coffee when the motorcycles began arriving. It wasn't the sound of the bikes. All 5 of them had spent enough time around noise that noise didn't move them. It was the change in the room. The way Sandra's shoulders came up slightly as she watched the lot fill. The way Frank set down the mug he was drying and set it down with the deliberate care of someone who was choosing his next move. Rick glanced at the window. Hell of a lot of bikes. Devil's Throttle patch, Marcus said, without looking up. Ava raised an eyebrow. You know them? Of them. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Their Billings chapter has 3 outstanding federal warrants in the leadership. Extortion, primarily. They have a pattern of identifying businesses owned by people who won't make trouble and making themselves comfortable. Everyone at the table looked at Frank and Sandra. Torres said. Yeah, Marcus said. They didn't discuss it further, not because they dismissed it, but because they were all running the same calculation simultaneously and reaching the same tentative conclusion. Wait and see. Don't borrow trouble. If it stays noise and posturing, let it stay noise and posturing. 17 men came in loud, which was a choice. That particular kind of loud which is about claiming space, making other people aware that the room's geometry has shifted and they are now at its periphery. They spread across 4 booths and 3 counter stools, and Razor, Derek Hollis, though nobody had called him Derek in 15 years, sat at the counter directly in front of Frank and surveyed the diner with the satisfied expression of a man finding that his expectations have been confirmed. He was 39, with a carefully maintained beard and forearms like bridge cables, and the specific social confidence that comes not from intelligence or charm, but from 20 years in environments where size and willingness to be unpleasant were entirely sufficient currencies. "Nice place," he said to Frank. Not a compliment. The opening line of a very old, very familiar script. Frank poured him a coffee without being asked. "Thanks. What can I get you?" His voice was steady. Frank Kowalski had operated this diner for 23 years and had encountered things considerably more frightening than a loud man, and he would not perform fear for anyone. Razor like that. Men who didn't crumble immediately were more interesting. "Full breakfast," he said. "Everyone's having the full breakfast." He looked at his crew. There was laughter. He looked back at Frank. "All on the house." A welcome to the neighborhood gesture. Frank looked at him for 2 full seconds. "Coffee's on the house," he said. "The rest is $7.95. A silence that had a particular quality settled over the counter. Not the silence before violence, but the silence before the decision about whether to make this interesting. Razor decided to let it sit. There was time. In the kitchen, Maya had heard the volume shift. She'd adjusted her position at the sink so she could see through the pass-through window, giving her a line of sight to roughly 40% of the dining room. She assessed what she could see, considered what she couldn't, and registered, with the part of her brain that had been trained for this and had never fully turned off, that 17 was a significant number, that the spatial arrangement gave the MC members positional advantage over other customers, and that the 5 individuals near the window booths were not what they appeared. She couldn't have named exactly how she knew. The way they sat, maybe. The way not one of them had their back to the door. The way the broad-shouldered one with the gray at his temples held his coffee cup, not with anxiety, but with patience, the stillness of someone who had learned that waiting was not passive but preparatory. She recognized what she was looking at because she was the same thing. She went back to washing dishes, and she waited. It happened at 11:14. Sandra had been running herself ragged. 17 extra orders, 2 of the bikers deliberately sending food back for reasons unrelated to the food, and when she pushed through the kitchen pass to grab the coffee pot, her face was flushed and her jaw was set in the way that Frank recognized, as "I am managing something I will deal with later in the parking lot." Maya set down the pan she was scrubbing, dried her hands, picked up the pot, walked out. Sandra tried to intercept her. "Maya, you really don't have to." But Maya was already through the swinging door, notepad in her apron pocket, moving through the dining room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had never done anything below full competence in her life. She filled cups. She moved around the tables with the economy of someone accustomed to working in tight quarters. The bikers made comments, the predictable kind, the kind that men performing for each other make when a young woman comes within arm's reach. Maya didn't respond. She didn't flinch. She moved with that particular quality that some women develop and most observers misread as coldness, which was not coldness at all, but rather the deliberate withholding of the thing aggressive people feed on, the visible discomfort, the reaction, the proof that they have reached you. She was reaching across Razor's space to fill the cup farthest from her when Wrench stuck his boot out. She caught herself. The coffee pot swung. A wave cleared the spout and hit Razor's jacket, an elaborate leather piece with the club's name embroidered on the back in thread that had cost more than most people's first car payments. The room went still. Razor stood up slowly, which was itself a performance. He wanted the rising to be witnessed. He was 6'2" and pushing 240, and he stood with the deliberateness of someone accustomed to his own size being enough of an argument. Maya stood her ground. The coffee pot was still in her hand. She was looking at him with the expression she always wore, attentive, calm, unhurried. And this, more than any defiant gesture, seemed to genuinely irritate him. Because the script called for her to look frightened. She wasn't reading from it. "You did that on purpose," he said. She took out her notepad, wrote quickly, held it up. "I'm sorry. It was an accident. I'll make sure your meal is comped." "Your meal?" He looked around at his crew. Laughter obliged him. He looked back at her. "You're a dishwasher, sweetheart." She wrote, "I'll make sure it's taken care of." He plucked the notepad from her hand and studied it, as if it were a curiosity. "You don't talk," he said. "You're a mute." She reached out and took the notepad back. "Yes," she wrote, held it up. Something shifted in his expression then, a small recalibration of available options. She watched him run the calculation. A girl who couldn't speak, couldn't call out, couldn't narrate what was happening. His people surrounding the room. A girl who'd just doused him in hot coffee. You come to the back, he said, and we'll discuss how you plan to fix this. Frank's voice cut across the room from behind the counter. She's not going anywhere with you. I'll comp your meal and replace the jacket. That's fair. That's what's happening. Razor turned toward Frank with the patience of a man who is not in a hurry. Old man, he said, I wasn't talking to you. This is my place. You're talking to me. In the third booth, Marcus Webb stopped moving his coffee cup. He looked at Torres. Torres gave him the smallest shake of the head. Not yet. But his eyes had changed. Then Wrench walked around the end of the counter. He didn't touch Frank. He simply stood beside him, close enough that Frank took an involuntary half-step backward, and Wrench matched it, and the physics of the moment made Frank's retreat visible to everyone in the room. Sandra's hand came up to her chest. Razor turned back to Maya. Back, he said. Now. She looked at him for 3 full seconds, not calculating whether to comply. She had already completed that calculation, but cataloging him the way she cataloged everything that presented potential threat. Height, weight, dominant hand, the specific geography of the room between herself and every exit. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen. In booth 3, Marcus Webb set down his coffee cup. His hands were very still. He was looking at her wrist. The kitchen was narrow. Between the prep counter and the shelving that held Frank's industrial pots, there were approximately 4 feet of clear space, which Maya had noted, some weeks into working here, was tactically less disadvantageous for a single person than it appeared, because it eliminated the possibility of being flanked on more than one axis simultaneously. She stood at her dish station. She turned to face the door. Razor came in first, then Wrench, then 2 others whose names she hadn't learned. They filled the space the way large bodies always fill small spaces, with the pressure of mass and intention. Wrench put his back against the door. In the dining room, the noise had dropped to near silence. Frank was behind the counter with Sandra's hand on his arm, holding him still, his palms flat on the counter surface in the posture of a man working very hard against his own instincts. The 2 truckers at the stools, the older couple in the window booth, Brett Calloway with his untouched eggs. Everyone was looking at their plates or their hands. The standard human response to danger that isn't directly yours, the practiced invisibility that everyone attempts and everyone regrets afterward. Rick Santos's knee had stopped bouncing entirely. He was motionless. You want to go in there? Marcus said. Yeah, Rick said. His voice was flat. Wait. Marcus. Wait. Something in his voice stopped Rick. Not hesitation, it was the opposite of hesitation. It was the voice Marcus used when he was processing information and needed 3 more seconds before the picture was complete. Rick looked at him. Marcus was staring at the kitchen door with an expression Rick couldn't name. Something between controlled disbelief and verification, like a man who thinks he might be perceiving something impossible and is working to confirm it before he acts. What is it? Danny said quietly. Marcus didn't answer. In the kitchen, Razor had moved to within 3 feet of Maya. This was the familiar part. You backed someone into a corner. You demonstrated the shape of available consequences. You left with an understanding in place, which was really a form of debt, which was really the thing he was after. He'd done this before. The structure always worked. You cost me $400, he said. That jacket is $400. So here's what happens. He glanced at Wrench. You're going to work this diner for free for 1 month. You sign your paychecks over to Tommy. After that, we're even. You understand how that works. Maya had her hands at her sides. She was looking at him. She took out her notepad, wrote 1 word, held it up. No. He stared at the notepad, then at her. No, he repeated. She put the notepad in her apron pocket. Wrench moved. He reached out and took hold of her upper arm. Not to hurt her yet, just to establish contact, to convey that the conversation about options had ended. He gripped above the elbow and felt the muscle beneath the thermal fabric. Not the softness he'd expected, but something with the density and tension of something worked very hard for a very long time. And this registered, somewhere in the back of his processing, as slightly wrong. But before he could revise his model of the situation, Maya moved. Not much. Not dramatically. A shift of weight. A rotation of her forearm in a movement so economical it barely registered as movement at all, and Wrench's grip loosened. Not because she'd forced it open, But because the angle had changed and his thumb was now in a position that required increasing pressure to maintain, and Wrench was smart enough, instinctively, to pause. They were in a standoff. Maya was looking at Razor. Wrench was looking at his own hand. Razor reached out and took the notepad from her pocket. "You won't be needing this," he said. He held it up for his crew. A small performance. He was going to tear it, which was the right gesture, dramatic enough to land, but not technically violence. He looked at her face, checking for the reaction, and the kitchen door opened. Marcus Webb stepped through it. He wasn't moving like someone who'd come to intervene. He moved calmly, hands visible and loose at his sides, the way someone moves when they've decided to be something other than a threat. Razor turned. "This isn't your—" "I know." Marcus's voice was level in the way a horizon is level. "I just need 1 second." He looked at Maya. She looked back at him. He'd seen her in profile through the pass-through, and he'd thought, dismissed the thought, returned to it, dismissed it again, that there was something familiar. When she'd walked out with the coffee pot, he'd gotten a cleaner angle. And when she'd turned to go back to the kitchen, he'd seen it. The wrist. Left wrist. The cuff of the gray sweatshirt had shifted when she'd reached across Razor's table, and on the inside of her left wrist was a tattoo. Small, precise, worn into the skin with the faded quality of something applied some years back. The Marine Corps Scout sniper insignia, the crossed rifles beneath the globe and anchor. But with a modification. A small laurel wreath encircling it. The unofficial mark, never authorized by any official document, passed between Marines only in story and in the specific reverence of men who had been through Scout sniper school and knew the full weight of what they were describing, worn only by Scout sniper graduates who had received the Medal of Honor. There were 3 living people who carried that tattoo. One was in a wheelchair in a VA facility in Phoenix. One was a 63-year-old former master sergeant with a ranch in Wyoming. And one was— He looked at her face. The face from a photograph in a display case at Camp Lejeune that he'd stood in front of as a junior Marine for 20 minutes, studying with the kind of attention you gave to things that seemed impossible, but had actually happened. She looked different now. Thinner. There were things in her face that weren't present in the official photograph. Things laid down by time and difficulty. But the geometry was unchanged. The sharp cheekbones, the dark eyes, the particular quality of stillness. He'd been 90% certain walking through the door. Now he was certain. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, and his voice had changed, fractionally, in a way that Razor wouldn't recognize and Maya would, because she'd heard that specific frequency before, that particular weight and address that only made sense in one register. And he looked directly at her and said, carefully, "Ma'am, are you all right?" The ma'am was not civilian courtesy. Maya heard the difference. Something moved through her eyes, something controlled before it could reach her face, and she nodded, once. Marcus looked at Razor. "I'm going to ask you to return her property." Razor tilted his head slowly. "You're going to ask me?" "Yes." "And if I don't?" Marcus considered this with perfect patience. "Then I'll ask again." There was something so completely absent of aggression in the way he said it that it landed wrong. It refused to give Razor the friction he needed, the emotion he could push back against. He looked at Marcus the way people look at things they cannot categorize. "Get out of my kitchen," he said. Marcus looked at Maya one last time. She had understood precisely what was happening. He could see that she understood. He could see something else, too. She hadn't decided yet whether to allow it, whether to let this proceed or to stop it. He nodded to her, barely perceptibly, a question. She looked away. He took that as an answer. He walked back out to the dining room. Ava Mitchell looked at him immediately. "Well." He sat. He picked up his beer. He set it back down. "I need to tell you something," he said. He told them in under 30 seconds. The name, the rank, the decoration, the display case photograph, the tattoo, and what it meant. He told them everything he knew, which was considerable, because Marcus Webb had spent time studying the career of Major Maya, in the way young surgeons study the cases of surgeons who have done things that shouldn't be possible. Danny Park said, "That's not," and stopped himself. Ava Mitchell said nothing. She was looking at the kitchen door. Her jaw was very tight. Rick Santos said, "Are you sure?" "Yes," Marcus said. Torres had not looked up from the table. He was running his own verification, organizing the facts he knew, cross-referencing Marcus's account against the record he'd encountered in his own service, checking the math. After a long moment he said, quietly, She left the Corps 11 months ago. Medical. And she's in there. She is washing dishes, Torres said. In Millhaven, Montana. A silence that had the quality of something heavy settling. In that kitchen right now, Marcus said. Torres stood up. He didn't speak. He simply stood and came to attention, heels together, back straight, chin level, eyes forward, in the middle of Frank's corner diner. It happened in one clean motion, the way something clicks into place after a long time of being misaligned. Marcus came to attention a half-second behind him. Then Ava, smooth and precise, her face composed into something that would have read as neutral to anyone who didn't know what she was feeling. Then Rick, whose knee had been bouncing for 2 hours and was now completely still. Then Danny, who had gone the particular color of someone experiencing multiple strong emotions simultaneously and had blinked 4 times in rapid succession and then pulled himself straight, with visible effort, and stood. 5 people. Civilian clothes, road-worn jackets, jeans and boots. Military haircuts. Standing at full attention in a small diner in a small town in Montana on a Tuesday morning in late September. The effect was immediate and deeply strange. It operated below the level of explanation. It preceded understanding. The truckers at the counter looked up from their food. The older couple in the window booth looked at each other. The college kid's phone appeared, and the red dot was on, and he was not pointing it at the bikers. 3 of Razor's men who'd remained in the dining room looked at each other with the uncertainty of people who have lost the thread of a situation that was supposed to be simple. Frank Kowalski was staring. Sandra Kowalski's hand had stopped moving entirely. Old Walt, at the corner stool, 67 years old, Vietnam veteran's hat on the counter beside his coffee, who had eaten lunch at Frank's twice a week for 9 years and had thought of the dishwasher girl as a sad case that Frank had done right by. Old Walt was watching the 5 standing Marines with the expression of a man to whom something has just become clear. The kitchen door swung open and Razor came out, followed by Wrench and the 2 others, and Razor's face was still set in the expression of a man who has concluded a piece of business satisfactorily. He stopped when he registered the 5 people at attention. He looked at them. He looked around the room. He looked back at them. What the hell is this? And then, because silence made him uncomfortable, and he was a man who processed uncertainty through performance, he laughed. What are you doing? Is this a show? You putting on a... Sir, Torres said. 1 word. But the direction of it. Not toward Razor, but past Razor, toward the kitchen door, which was swinging open, pulled every eye in the room simultaneously. Maya came through. She had taken off the dish gloves. Nothing else had changed. Cargo pants, gray sweatshirt, rubber band, boots. She smelled of kitchen heat and dish soap. She came through the door and stopped when she saw them. All 5, locked at attention. Eyes forward. Still as stone. Her face didn't change. She had made a career of her face not changing, but something moved through her body. A small involuntary thing, like the micro-adjustment of someone who has absorbed a blow and is choosing not to show it. She stood still. Razor looked from her to the 5 Marines and back. I don't understand what's happening, he said, which was the most honest thing he had said since he walked through the door. Torres spoke. His voice was clear, even, and calibrated to carry. This is Major Maya Chun, United States Marine Corps, retired. Former Scout Sniper. Former Senior Instructor, Scout Sniper School, Quantico. Youngest recipient of the Medal of Honor in 22 years. Citation for action in Khost Province, Afghanistan, in which she provided overwatch for a 12-hour extraction operation under sustained enemy contact, at engagement distances up to 840 meters. Torres. The room stopped. Her voice was low and rough from long disuse. Barely above a whisper, the voice of someone relearning how to use an instrument they'd set down, but it was clear. 1 word. His name. With a specific intonation that meant that's enough. Torres stopped. He looked at her. She looked at the 5 of them. All 5, in order, and something passed between her and each of them that the room could feel without being able to name. Then she turned and faced the dining room. She took out her notepad. She wrote for a moment, then turned the notepad and held it up so the room could read it. This is their call, not mine. They don't have to do this. She wrote again on the next page. Held that up. But thank you. Old Walt picked up his hat from the counter. He held it to his chest. Sandra Kowalski made a sound she'd been holding for several minutes, and put both hands over her mouth. The college kid had been recording for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Razor looked from the old man with his hat pressed to his chest, to the 5 Marines, to Maya, to the notepad, to his crew. The geometry of the room had reorganized itself entirely while he was still working from the previous map. He was the physically largest person present, and he had the most people on his side, and he was standing in the exact center of the room, and none of these things were helping him. "This is theater," he said. But something had left his voice. Torres had not moved. None of them had moved. "What she did," Torres said, and now he was not speaking to Razor. He was speaking to the room, to the truckers and the older couple, and Brett with his phone and Frank behind the counter, and Sandra behind her hands, and old Walt with his hat at his chest. Required her to lie on a ridge at 40 degrees below wind chill for 11.5 hours without movement. She had a fractured rib from the insertion to position. She did not report it. She held overwatch for 12 hours. She walked out under her own power. She was 23 years old. The official citation says she extracted 7 people, Ava Mitchell said. Her voice was steady and her jaw was tight. The actual number is 8. The 8th is classified. Anyone in this room who wants to know who that person is can file under FOIA. Wrench had moved 6 inches away from Maya without appearing to make a conscious decision to do so. One of Razor's men said, very quietly, "She doesn't look." "No," Marcus Webb said. He turned his head, the only movement any of the 5 Marines had made since coming to attention, and looked at the man who had spoken. His voice didn't change. That was worse than if it had. "She doesn't look like what you think a person who has done those things looks like. That's because you've never left this country. The men she went up against in that valley, the operation she ran, people who have been fully briefed on it still have trouble sleeping. Not because of what was done to them, because of what it cost her to do it." He paused. "She is washing dishes in Millhaven, Montana, because she has been through something that would have ended most people, and she is still here, and she found a job and a place, and she is getting through. And what you did today," he looked at Razor, and his voice remained perfectly level, which was far more frightening than anger would have been. "What you did today was back one of the finest human beings this country has ever produced into a corner and try to take something from her. And I need you to understand exactly what I mean when I say, she was never afraid. Not for 1 second. She was watching you the way she watches everything. She was waiting." Silence. Frank Kowalski was looking at Maya. Maya was looking at the floor, her jaw set, wearing the expression of someone who would strongly prefer to be somewhere else. It was the most recognizably, entirely human expression she'd worn all day, and it hit Sandra harder than anything Torres had said. Frank's voice, when it came, was rough in the way of someone who has not expected to feel what they are feeling. "You've been here 14 months, he said. Maya looked up. 6 in the morning. 5 days a week. 14 months. He stopped, cleared his throat. "You never said a word about any of it." She took out her notepad, wrote, turned it toward him. "I wasn't ready to be that person yet. I'm still not sure I am. I just needed somewhere to put my hands for a while." He read it. He nodded once, very slowly. "Okay," he said. And then, softer, like an agreement being made. "Okay." Sandra made a sound that she turned into a breath. Brett Calloway had been recording for 6 minutes. He was 21 years old and studying film at the University of Montana, which his parents thought was an impractical choice, and which would turn out to be the thing that caused this particular video to land differently from the hundreds of bystander-filmed confrontations that uploaded and vanished every week. He had captured the 5 Marines at attention from a wide angle showing the full room, then cut close on Torres's face, then Maya's, then Sandra's hands over her mouth, then old Walt removing his hat, then back to wide. The whole geography of it, the contrast between the loud men who had arrived claiming everything and the quiet woman who had been washing dishes. Deputy Cal Merritt walked in at that moment. He'd been called by one of the truckers, who'd slipped outside during Torres's account. Merritt was a large man who carried himself with the mild exhaustion of someone who had expected his afternoon to be straightforward. He looked around the room. At the 5 people at attention. At Razor's crew distributed across the diner. At Maya. At the old veteran with his hat at his chest. "Somebody want to explain what's going on?" he said. "Sure," said old Walt. His voice had the texture of old gravel. "You've got 17 men who came in here and committed extortion, criminal intimidation, and harassment. You've got the diner owner as primary witness, the young woman over there as the primary victim, and me is secondary. If you run the outstanding warrants on this club's membership, you're going to have a very productive afternoon. Merritt looked at him. And I'd suggest, Walt added, nodding toward Maya, that you're careful about how you handle her specifically, on account of who she is. Merritt looked at Maya. He'd been in and out of Frank's diner for 12 years. He'd been aware of the quiet dishwasher girl for 14 months in the way you're aware of furniture, present, unremarkable, not requiring consideration. He looked at her now with the expression of a man revising a significant number of assumptions. Who is she? He said. Torres, still at attention, told him. Merritt was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for his radio. It took 40 minutes for backup to arrive, 2 additional deputies and a state trooper coming from 30 miles out. During those 40 minutes, the Devil's Throttle men sat very still in their booths, because 5 Marines were in the room and none of them had sat back down. Sandra brought Maya a cup of coffee. She set it on the prep counter at the pass-through, touched Maya's arm briefly, and didn't say anything. Maya looked at the coffee and then at Sandra and nodded. Sandra nodded back. That was a complete exchange between 2 women who were very different from each other and understood each other anyway. Ava Mitchell had broken from attention when Merritt arrived and was now leaning against the counter near the kitchen pass, close enough to Maya to be present without crowding her. She hadn't said anything to Maya directly. She wasn't sure what to say. She was 28 years old and had done things she was proud of, and she was aware, with complete clarity, that she was standing next to someone who had done things that existed in a separate category, and the awareness was humbling in a way that didn't require words. At some point in the waiting, Danny Park became aware that Maya had moved to stand beside him. He looked down at her. She was maybe 5'4" next to his 6'1", in cargo pants and a sweatshirt with a rubber band in her hair, and she was looking up at him with that steady, direct attention, and he felt approximately 17 years old. She held up her notepad. "You okay, Corporal?" He stared at the notepad for a full second. Then, against his will and entirely helplessly, he laughed. A small, shocked laugh. The laugh of someone who has been ambushed by something unexpected. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. He stopped. Started again. "It's an honor, ma'am. That's all." She wrote. "Don't be too impressed. I was terrible at folding laundry. Anyone at Quantico will confirm this." He laughed again, and this time it was real, and she watched him for a moment with something that might have been warmth, careful warmth, the kind that had learned to be kept interior, but present nonetheless. And then she moved back to her station. She stood at the dish sink. She picked up her coffee. Frank was still watching her from behind the counter, with the expression of a man who has been revising his understanding of something for the past hour and is finding that the revised version, while larger and stranger than the original, fits better. "Are you going to stay?" he said. She looked at him. She looked around the room. The 5 Marines finally at ease, talking quietly near the window booths. Merritt directing the bikers toward the door in handcuffs. 17 outstanding warrants distributed among the 17 members, a number that would make the regional warrant database briefly famous. Old Walt putting his hat back on his head with the deliberate care of someone returning something to its proper place. Sandra refilling coffee. Brett sitting in his booth with his phone face down in his lap, looking at nothing, still processing. She took out her notepad. She wrote for longer than usual. 3 full lines. She held it toward Frank. "I came here because it was far from everywhere I'd been, and I needed to learn how to be quiet without it meaning something was wrong. I think I've mostly learned that. I don't know what comes next. I have to find out whether the person I was before is still inside me, or whether I'm someone new, and I'm not sure yet which answer I'm hoping for. But the dishes are clean, and your soup is the best I've had in my life, and Sandra is kinder than I probably deserve. So for now, yes, I'll stay." Frank read it. He read it twice. He cleared his throat. Then he folded the note carefully, put it in his shirt pocket, and picked up a dish towel and started drying mugs, which was what he did when he didn't know what to do with what he was feeling. At 6:47 that evening, Brett posted the video. He'd edited it carefully. He was, in fact, studying film, which his parents thought was an error in judgment, and which would turn out to be the skill that caused this particular footage to reach the people it reached. He'd opened on the wide shot, the full diner, the 5 Marines coming to attention, the room's confused silence. He'd cut to Torres's face when Torres spoke, to Maya's face when she stopped him, to Old Walt's hands removing his hat, to Sandra. To the full tableau, the contrast between the men who had arrived claiming everything and the woman in the gray sweatshirt who had been washing dishes. He titled it, "5 Marines Stood for a Dishwasher." Now I understand why. He was not a person who usually went viral. He had 340 followers. He uploaded it and went asleep. By midnight, it had 14 million views. By the following morning, 40 million. By the end of the week, it had been shown in Pentagon briefing rooms, in VA hospitals, in high school auditoriums in 22 states, and in 17 countries. It had been written about in 11 languages. The comment sections, which were usually the worst of humanity, ran, for once, almost entirely toward the same statement. I didn't know her name before today. I won't forget it. Razor Derek Hollis was arraigned on Tuesday on 7 counts of extortion, 3 counts of criminal intimidation, and various outstanding warrants. He did not make bail. In a subsequent interview, a reporter asked whether he'd known who Maya Chun was when he cornered her in the kitchen. He said he didn't see how it mattered who she was. She'd spilled coffee on him. The interview ran alongside the video as a split-screen comparison clip and became the most shared piece of media in the country that month. The Marine Corps made no official statement for 48 hours, which was itself a kind of statement. On the third day, General Richard Hammond, 4-star, 30 years decorated, Maya's former commanding officer, and the man who had visited her hospital room once and then stopped visiting, held a press conference. He got through 9 of his 11 prepared minutes before his voice changed. Major Chin's record of service, he said, at the 10-minute mark, represents the finest. He stopped. He looked down at his notes and then looked up and visibly decided what kind of press conference this was going to be. She was the best I ever trained, the best I ever saw. And when she needed the institution, he stopped. We should have done better by her. That's all I have to say about it. We should have done better. He was asked whether the Marine Corps intended to reach out to Major Chun. I already did, he said. This morning. He was not asked what she had written back. She had written, "I'm not angry. I just needed to be quiet for a while. I think I'm done being quiet now." 6 months later. The photograph on the wall of Frank's Corner Diner was a candid. Nobody had staged it. Brett had taken it the morning after everything, when the diner had opened at 6, and it was just Frank and Sandra and Maya, and the early light coming through the east-facing windows, and Maya had been at the dish station doing what she always did, hands in the water, precise, economic, nowhere else in her mind but here. In the photograph, she was looking up. Someone had said something, and she'd turned toward the camera, and her expression was not the expression from the White House photographs or the dress uniform photographs or the official citation portraits. Something was different. Something was lighter. Not happiness exactly. She was not and had never been the kind of person whose face defaulted toward happiness, but presence. Fully in the room. The eyes with some of their distance gone. Frank had printed it on cardstock, framed it in a plain wood frame, and hung it between the mounted trout and the 1987 hunting season photograph. No caption, just her name. Maya Chun. That was enough. 300 miles east, in a classroom at the Scout Sniper School in Quantico, Virginia, Sergeant Marcus Webb walked a new class through the fundamentals of position, patience, and the specific discipline of waiting for the right moment rather than the first available one. He had transferred 6 weeks earlier, which was either a coincidence or the consequence of a conversation with Captain Torres that most people hadn't been present for. At the front of the room, in the glass display case beside the door, there was a new photograph. Not the White House one. A different one. A woman at a dish station in a diner, looking up, with morning light on her face. New students always asked about it in the first week. Who is she? Why does a dishwasher get a frame in here? Marcus always answered the same way. She's not a dishwasher, he said. She's the finest scout sniper this country has ever produced. She spent 14 months washing dishes in Montana. And if you complete this school and do the work and are lucky enough to understand the full weight of this job, he'd look at them, all of them, the new ones who hadn't yet become who they were going to be. You might understand why she did that, and why it doesn't change who she is at all. He would let that sit. Any other questions? There were always more questions. There were always students who wanted to hear it again, who came back after class with the expression of people working something out. Marcus didn't mind. He thought about Frank's diner, and Sandra's soup, and the rubber band in Maya's hair, and the 5 of them locked at attention while the silverware rattled. And he thought that some stories needed to be told and retold, and carried forward, not because they explained anything, but because they kept reminding you that the world contained people who were quietly extraordinary, who asked nothing from you until the moment they asked everything, and who were worth knowing. He thought Maya Chin was worth knowing. He thought that was reason enough.